if people really take this stuff to heart, they really have to take it to heart. In my experience, people who go through that process do not return to denial, do not stay in despair, and they end up in a spirit of cherishing what they have, and cherishing their loved ones, cherishing a walk in nature, and cherishing the opportunity to be open and honest about your feelings and how you see the world, and stop pretending.
Some do's and don'ts. So don't panic, don't process this alone, don't follow a new crowd, because often we want to think, oh, I've got to do something, well, you know, there's momentum over there, so I'll go over there. Don't blame, but do expect a change in your priorities. Do join or organise groups, do act locally, but also politically. And I would say do not drop mitigation. So don't drop this agenda of how do we cut carbon, and don't sort of move into some sort of grim survivalist mentality. So I'm saying, you know, mitigation, adaptation, and the good things of life, they're all something to seek to integrate in what we do next.
Hard to be the bell ringer. That's what you all are, and that's what Jem is. In a most prolific way. Thank you, Jem. And I think that's why we need each other. That's why we need to ask each other for help. That's why we lean in. That's what we activate in each other. And Jem has activated that in me and in so many thousands of people. So I introduce you to Professor Jem Bendell. Thank you, Jem.
Yes, Jem!
Thank you, Skeena. Wow, I'm glad to be here with you in Oxford Circus today, where we challenge the circus of lies that is our political system and most of the mainstream media. So yes, you heard I'm an academic, I'm a professor, and in my field we're meant to be discovering truths and sharing them. But what I discovered is to do that you have to be brave enough to let yourself see the truth for yourself. For 20 years I was slaving away working to try and make business and finance a little bit kinder to people and planet. And because I was doing that, I got somewhere in my career. And I've been invited to give talks around the world to audiences of businesses and banks, basically the same story being, well done, but let's try a little bit harder. A couple of years ago, I was invited to give a keynote talk at an event on climate and business, and I felt sick. I felt I can't go along and give another pep talk to say, let's just try a bit harder. I realized that we were failing, and that the system that we're in is going to fail, and we can no longer continue talking about effectively tinkering around the edges. So I ditched my speech and I gave a talk where I said, it's too late to change this system. We have to be brave enough to admit to ourselves that we have to have a different kind of conversation about what to do next, even if it feels like we have no idea what that means. We have to be brave enough to start that conversation.
We've been trying to do something about this for decades. 1987 was the first time that the UN General Assembly agreed that climate change is real. We're causing it and it's a problem. Lots of people have been doing a lot of stuff since then. We have to recognize that this is not addressed credibly, responsibly now in a reformist way. We have to approach it in a revolutionary way. And what does that mean? Well, hopefully it means bold, peaceful action, but I think it does mean challenging and upending the systems of power that have sort of based on this system and are maintaining it. And that's a real challenge to people, those of us who work within current systems of power.
Britain, for example, we import 60% of our food. And we haven't had a food security policy or strategy or review in the UK for about 10 years. Very vulnerable to weather shocks to agriculture around the world. There's going to be difficulties, and we need to adapt, and we need to adapt fairly. And the problem is, if we don't recognise that soon, we'll find that we'll have more people going hungry in the UK, and then what will that lead to? It will be understandable if that leads to more crime. But then, of course, what will that lead to? That will lead to greater fear and people turning inward and perhaps wanting more authoritarian government and so on. So we have to start planning now to adapt fairly. And when I say fairly, we've got to realise that this is a matter of justice as well in terms of how resources are distributed. The psychological or the cultural impacts of people waking up to their vulnerability, the kind of psychosocial stress that could occur about that could cause problems, could even hasten disruption of societies. But I think it doesn't have to be that way. If more of us are prepared to face the situation now and support each other in processes to actually bear witness to the difficult emotions, to not act from them, and to find ways of recommitting to being curious and compassionate and creative about the implications, then I think there's definitely a lot that we can learn and a lot that we can do better, no matter what comes next. Indeed, there's a lot of evidence against the argument that to anticipate collapse will lead to apathy. The evidence is available through just talking to climate activists, paying attention to the life stories of some of the leaders in movements like Extinction Rebellion. They say quite clearly that their realization that climate change is not just some far-off concern, but actually is impacting people everywhere right now, and is going to get worse no matter what we do, and really therefore condemns so much of our way of life and our values and the way we've worked over the past decades. That is such a kind of like an existential challenge, which is why they transform their life and become full-time activists with far less compromise with the existing systems.
But you learn along with those who look to you to lead. You sort of like wander the trail together after you've invited them to take the wander, and you've gathered to you a community of scholars and healers and truth tellers and even change makers, but you don't seem to have an agenda per se, or a communications department boiling it all down to sound bites. And I know I tried to do that with deep adaptation, but it doesn't seem to be in your nature. And you've come at our current predicament from many angles over many years. You're not all wet behind the ears on this one. You've roused a lot of passions, but you're not a rabble rouser. You've willingly torpedoed a secure career in sustainability leadership by pointing out that consultants never solve problems. If they did, they would be out of a job. So the rest of us all nibble around the edges with papers and pronouncements, but don't mess with the emperor, and you have messed with the emperor. And yet you insist on nonviolence, on a loving response. And now you're working on the scholar's warning. You've put your finger on some of the sources of our collapse, but seem to not be willing or able to others, to like focus on the blame and trying to find a scapegoat. Even as you come under attack and get blamed from many sides, really, you are very unusual. So with all of that and whatever else is on your mind, Jem, what could possibly go right?
And what Deep Adaptation community has shown, and the Deep Adaptation Forum in particular, since we started it back in early 2019, is that there's a very different way of responding, which then doesn't shrink our sense of connection, but opens it up. Where old stories of who I am and why I have self-respect, why I think I'm worth something, that all fades away or crumbles because our belief in current society crumbles. And instead we show up more raw, more open, and compassionate and creative. This is what's happening. People are changing their lives because of their anticipation of collapse to relate more openly and want to do what's right, come what may. So we might not fix much, we might not stop much harm, but we still want to do what's right. And we don't want to turn away from suffering in the world by the stories that we've grown up within that reduce the dignity and worth of people that don't look like us, sound like us, were born somewhere else, and beyond that, other species. This assumption that humanity is the center of the universe. So what could go right is more of that, because what I've just described doesn't depend on fairy tale solutions to the climate crisis. If things keep going badly, then more of what I've described is going to happen. Now, it doesn't mean, sorry, I should say, and when more of it happens and more people are connected with each other, it does grow exponentially.
Today we're going to hear from Dr. Ye Tao about some of the awkward science on climate change currently ignored, about a net zero paradox. When working at the Rowland Institute of Harvard University, Dr. Tao realized just how bad the climate crisis was becoming. So in 2020, he left what he was doing and founded the MIR framework.
The first point I want to hit is that we have another degree of warming in store for us, and that the IPCC has been downplaying this inconvenient truth. So when we burn fossil fuel, we not only emit the long-lived greenhouse gases, but also short-lived aerosols that interact with clouds and promote brighter clouds to cool the climate. And the result is that we don't experience the full impact of greenhouse gases, but rather the difference between the greenhouse gases and these cooling aerosols. So in the future, when we do indeed achieve 100% carbon neutrality, what would happen is that, at least in the short term, there will be a much larger amount of positive reinforcing heating the planet.
You mentioned the data I shared on online sentiment analysis. I chose Twitter because it's one way of getting data to show what's happening, but it's also not just Twitter. From July 2022, there has been a huge upsurge in what I think looks like a new kind of, it's not climate denialism, it's anti-climate action. And yeah, it's early days, so I can't say for certain why that's happening.
The theory is that in periods of breakdown, the commons flourished. And interesting, because you were just saying that, okay, when Tsarist Russia was collapsing, then cooperative ownership flourished before the
people stepped up. People stepped up, yeah.
So I think we do see that, and that's it. People step up because of course we do. I mean, it is perhaps the greatest, most stupid lie that somehow we need someone with a official designation of power from on high to tell us what to do and fix things for us.
Yeah.
We all know from our professional lives that the people who climbed the ladder had something wrong with them.
Yeah. Yeah, you need
They're all dealing with their childhood trauma. Fine, okay, but let's not. As soon as they lose accountability and the ability to be challenged and removed, then things get really risky.
Yeah, I don't think the green authoritarians will defeat the commons. People don't like authoritarianism, but they love the commons. People from all over the political compass, or eco-libertarianism, as you call it, it's when it's rolling and providing benefits for people, especially working class people, that will make it very, very hard to stop.
Well, it's good you point that out, because so much of the local stuff, oh, my cat's come in. A good part of the local stuff is has been with things like transition towns, which haven't really seemed to get anywhere near the working class, and yet,
exactly,
there's a lot of community solidarity and collaboration within Britain's working class communities that could be recognised and supported and built from, rather than sort of something entirely separate. So the ways that you can work with local businesses, small entrepreneurs, local support groups, youth groups in working class communities with your commons tools, that really is the way to go, and that is properly building from below, rather than just working with sort of middle classes with a bit of spare cash to dabble in Totnes pound ideas or whatever.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, not me.
What I'm saying is, two things can be true at the same time. There's a dual crisis. On the one hand, you've got elites with any public problem. Part of the solution will be them making more money, them having more power, us being more surveilled and controlled. And I call them in my book the fake green globalists. And I completely understand, I think it's completely valid, that people are upset with how the environmental and climate agenda seems to be hijacked now by this. There's lots of dubious, ecologically dubious schemes like direct air capture and carbon trading and all sorts. So it's kind of almost like a global disaster capitalism that's going on. So that can be true. On the other hand, there's a climate and ecological crisis, which is real, and we really need to be bold and creative about what we do about it. What I've sensed in the last few years is that there are quite a lot of people who look at the climate and ecological crisis and understandably go, "Ah!" And I do wonder how much of the response of climate activists is basically the "Ah!" And then something more recent is a lot of people now are just spending all their time going, "Fake green globalists, ah!" And what I think and what I hope for is that we can have a sort of a more mature environmentalism. We can reclaim current environmentalism from just those two kind of reactions, and we could advance a bold, creative, caring, people's environmentalism. And of course,
what would your prescription be for what they should do to advance the vision that you articulate in your book and that you've articulated today?
Yeah, I'm a bit heartbroken as to how bad government is becoming in most parts of the world, no matter who gets elected, and how captured regulatory institutions are, and how the mainstream media seem to straitjacket conversations of political possibility. So yeah, I've I could come up with lots of ideas, and why bother, because none of them are going to happen. That's and that's where I've got to. So so yeah, I could say, look, you've got to do something about the monetary system. There's no point in doing everything if we're going to have an expansionist monetary system that's going to keep driving us towards ever more consumption. That's a suicidal system, given the current environmental context. I could be talking about we need to power down. We can't pretend that we can just transition off fossil fuels. We could be talking, therefore, about unprecedented levels of economic wealth redistribution, because you just are not going to have any legitimate case for making poor people poorer. So you have to start at the top. You go on and on and on. I mean, basically, just look at what the Green parties were saying around the world in 1985. Dig up one of those manifestos and it was all there. Not what the Green parties are saying now. They've gone backwards. But look at what they were saying in the 80s. That was about right. You know, yeah. So we do need to see international cooperation and framework around experimentation on safe and accountable and not profit-driven geoengineering, and I think it's appalling that billions are being poured into the pockets of the corporations that have the most lobbying power. So, you know, why do direct air capture machines get any funding whatsoever? They shouldn't. Should be going. I know you're doing some involved in some interesting things, Herb. Mia should be getting all that money as well. This is the problem, though. This isn't like just a mistake or an accident. It's designed this way. We have a corrupt system of governance where those who can afford the best lobbyists and get the best PR then just get government policies and government budgets on their side. So I'm just inviting people to be a bit more rebellious of spirit, mind, and speech.
And so, yeah, in my book, the subtitle of my book is A Freedom-Loving Response to Collapse. And okay, that's a little bit provocative because of how people in the West, at least in Anglo-Saxon countries, particularly America, when they hear the word freedom-loving, that may be evoking certain frames. But a freedom-loving environmentalism arises from the knowledge that it was the manipulation of our hearts and minds by systems shaped by the money power that drove the wholesale destruction of life on Earth that we've seen. And so liberating our true natures has to be part of the response to our current predicament. So it's about seeing our unfreedom and oppression as the cause of the crisis. We've been manipulated, coerced, and encouraged to objectify, commodify, dominate, compete, externalize, use up, trash, and to feel numb about all of that, about all the damage we've done to each other and nature. So a freedom-loving response to that, a freedom-loving response to collapse of that, involves letting go of familiar but failing systems of comfort and security and beginning to find mutually beneficial ways of living with all life, including each other. I'm working, not with that many, but with a few farmers in Bali, in my organic farm school. And they don't have all the education and they don't really know about all manner of things. It would be weird to talk about a planetary future, what's for the whole of Homo sapiens, and that's all just weird blah blah. I don't think they are any less awake. In fact, I think they might be more awake than the people who write blogs and send emails about a global brain awakening and planetary consciousness emerging. I really don't like what I think is the implicit modernity and patriarchy and anthropo supremacy that's sort of lingering in that worldview that we are all going to come together in a global consciousness that's awakening and progressing. I think it's patriarchal. It's like, no, sod it. Why can't you just be happy that? What is really frightening, I think, for a lot of people in Western modern culture is that, no, it's our culture that is omnicidal, that humans lived for hundreds of thousands of years without screwing up the planet in the way that we've done in 200 years. And there are, even today, 4% of the world's population is indigenous, and where they live, there's over about 80% of the world's biodiversity. Now, what does that tell you? And if you look again, also, this is also a bit annoying to hear for some people, but so much of the archaeology and anthropology of the past years has been racist.
So basically, it's assumed that the First Peoples were somehow not stewarding and working with their environments. And actually, looking at it again, for example, now we know that the Amazon was not a wild, untouched environment, but a wild, gardened one, and that hundreds, if not thousands, of species in the Amazon are because of millennia of human settlement.
I mean, I remember back in like 2008, I was very compelled by the peak oil theorists like Richard Weinberg and Dmitry Orlov, and they were basically saying, you know, it's kaput, you know. And then obviously they discovered non-conventional sources of oil like shale, and so they kept the machine going. So I guess the tech optimist, the you know, market-driven fundamentalist answer would be, yeah, there's problems, but that's just going to fuel innovation. And you'll see things like nuclear fusion is on the horizon, you know, using genetic modification.
I love it. It's always on the horizon. For my entire life, ever since I could even like read, it's always on the horizon. So I didn't realize how much I believed that. I didn't realize how much I was an eco-modernist until I actually looked into it. So a couple of data points. Just the UK, where I am here, 1% of the world's population. If all combustion engine vehicles were to all be electric vehicles, that would take up twice the annual global production of cobalt, which is currently needed in the batteries. So using current technologies. So that's just 1%. So then the techno-salvationist, eco-modernist response is, oh, but then we'll find new batteries. There's always a new...
Or we'll learn how to mine the asteroids.
So the International Energy Agency of the UN did a critical minerals report about 2 years ago, and they looked at just for transport and household, which is a small part of the total energy consumption on the planet. But they looked at that and they thought, for the batteries required for that, anywhere between 400 and 4,000% increase in the annual production of the crucial rare earth metals, and that's just impossible. And then there are no plans to do that. And guess what? Where are those metals? They're under the feet of indigenous peoples or the most pristine environments. So basically, this eco-modernist dream, they're just, you mentioned colonialism after, in order for them to drive their Teslas and live the dream and pretend to lie to each other, this is the future, they're going to be destroying the last amazing wilderness areas on the planet, and in a new wave of so-called green colonialism. And it's already started. And there's a belligerence behind it. Elon Musk said, you know, we'll coup whoever we want to, when someone said, oh, but all these metals you need for Tesla and Bolivia.
And I have friends that are like this, saying that this whole thing around the climate is a hoax, and it's designed by the government or the controlling elites to keep us afraid, so that they may better control us.
So there are global elites and global corporations, and they are untethered from any national interests, let alone community interests. And it is no surprise to know that any public disaster or public threat, they will come up with ideas of how to respond that further entrench their power, their status, and certainly don't challenge it. And some people, understandably, when faced with how scary the climate and ecological crisis seems, and with, as you say, the totally justified doubt about information sources and doubt about the
credibility and ethics of those in authority. And I mean that broadly. I don't just mean politicians, I mean senior civil servants and top experts in peak bodies. That very justifiable, reasonable doubt about the ethics and credibility of those people and those institutions means that there can be this sort of, combined with the fear and the worry about these stories of climate change, this sort of openness to what I believe are conspiracy theories, like the theory that climate change is invented by Klaus Schwab in order to lock you in your neighborhood under a 15-minute city plan, because for whatever reason. Look, societal collapse is a process, not an event. And obviously the word, when many people hear it, they think it's all or nothing, like a building just suddenly collapsing. So for me, a big insight was that how it's a process that I believe started around 2015. At least that's when the data sets that I looked at show it started. And we'll never really be able to know exactly. And perhaps when everything has collapsed, then that we won't have these means of communication to have a conference and decide, okay, this is how it collapsed and when it collapsed. So, but it's an unfolding process. That means there's good work to be done in all manner of ways in that process. There are better or worse companies to work for over the coming years. And so if you can find a company that's more aligned to your values and doing less harm to the planet and providing more environmentally friendly and socially just products and services, and ideally that's also at least not undermining the relocalization of economies and life, then great. And we should celebrate those companies and connect people with them. Absolutely. I don't believe that within the existing monetary systems that we have, that those regenerative enterprises will actually add up to some kind of revolution towards an ecological civilization. Not at all. We have an extractive, expansionist system that demands that of our societies. So the one silver lining of what's going on is that monetary system is going to collapse at some point as well. When I use the word collapse in that way, I mean like something more fundamental, more rapid.